Do we have any apologies? No apologies from Cabinet members? No? And I assume there aren't any... I do have a mayoral statement. I'm tempted to make a brief mayoral statement, which is, this looks like a more fun than previous meetings. There's greater public interest, which is good, which I welcome. And we got a number of questions and concerns about reports we're receiving, and I'm very happy to receive those. And there's potentially a late report, but I think there's a conversation taking place between the chair of ONS, and it may not be a late report. But one thing I can share with you is that one of the things I've discovered in my it's over 5 months, approaching 6 months as mayor, is that there are a number of decisions which were sort of delayed. This is not making a trivial point, in the tendering of contracts, which means we've got a bit of catching up to do on a number of our contracts. And there's one report here this evening which concerns that on the McLeish care services. There's another potentially on the Drug and Alcohol Action Team, which is fairly well documented in the past, which I was hoping we might receive a late report, but which I probably need to take as a mayoral decision between now and Christmas, because it's been delayed for an awful long time now. And I find that quite annoying. I think it's let down local people, and we need to get to the end of that and have things done on time and properly and accountably and transparently, and hopefully we'll be able to do that. If I can move on to declarations. Do members have any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests? No. So moving on then to the minutes. Are we happy to note the minutes of the 3rd of November meeting? Yeah, silence is adoring agreement. Number 4 then is overview and scrutiny, pre-scrutiny questions, and this is where I invite Councillor John Pearce to present any pre-scrutiny questions from ONS. And the process we followed is that if there are particular representations on particular reports, we'll take them when we receive that report. I can tell you actually another bit of housekeeping, which is the suggestion's been made that we should take item 5.1 and then 5.3 before we go back to 5.2. This allows the horde of planning officers to leave the room having dealt with all their items. So if we go to... horde is a very positive term, by the way. Councillor Pearce.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. About an hour ago, I was notified that I would have to give to accept an urgent request for information for a decision. I've asked for the information. I'm still not clear. I haven't had any of the documentation. I haven't had the item that is supposed to be on the agenda. I'm happy to consider what the proposal is, as long as I've had time to look at the documentation and ask officers a few questions so I can just understand, what the issue is. Or the other option probably is for yourself to decide is whether it gets taken at a later point, once there is the opportunity to go through the information as an individual mayoral decision. I just haven't had any information whatsoever, and it's just really difficult while I'm trying to rush over to understand what is needed tonight, actually.
Shall I address that particular point then? So this relates to the Drug and Alcohol Action Team. It's a contract which is over 2 years late in retendering because it was delayed repeatedly, and we took it at our pre-meeting, and it should have arrived properly rewritten, and it has only arrived this afternoon. I hadn't seen it before this afternoon in its final form. It needs to be taken pretty urgently because we're way behind with the retendering of this contract, and that relates to the point I made earlier about delayed retendering of contracts. And so my intention would be, if we can't take it on the agenda today, that we publish the report so people can scrutinise it outside of the committee cycle, that I do a mayoral decision, which I probably do need to do, and that it can be retrospectively called in and reviewed by ONS if the need arises. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think for me, I think we're trying to get more decisions made in Cabinet, but I just think, just given the short time that we have, I think I would like some more time to really consider it. And I had hoped and I hope this is the end of the process. I know for the last number of months, I had very last minute sort of requests to allow urgent notices, and then there was further confusion around how that all fed into the decision-making of the commissioners, but I hope that we're able to move forward on that, because asking for urgent requests with an hour's notice is not really where we need to be as a local authority. So from that, I'll head on to the spotlight that we had last night, Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We had the Borough Commander, and all credit to him, this is the second time that he's attended the Overview and Scrutiny Committee within a year. And we looked at the Mayor of London's targets, the MOPAC 7, and the target around committing those. And to be honest, we've seen in some instances where violent crime locally has increased by 45% since 2011-12. And so we had a detailed discussion around what the Borough Commander and the team are doing to look into that. We also had a long discussion on an issue which is really important to many members, is around the ward panels and how we can enable them to function and work going forward. And it was really good to hear that sort of reaffirmed commitment and belief and support for ward panels, but also for PCSOs in the medium term, given the decision from the CSR. We also talked about the issue that's on the minds of many residents, the recent Paris attacks, and what the local response is and what the partnership between the council and the police is trying to achieve, and that was really, really a well-rounded discussion. And we had the head of community safety and the lead member, and I think we'd like to thank them for that really good discussion. We also discussed a mini spotlight around the challenges around planning for school places, and we heard from Councillor Saunders about the relationships that are being built up with free schools and academies, and the proposals and the current consultation from our schools. All of it led into discussions about a big agenda item tonight, which is the local plan, and we all clearly saw the links that need to be made and to ensure that we are planning truly for the needs of the community. We looked at the corporate complaints information and annual report, and had a number of concerns around information that was missing. So we weren't able to see the number of leaseholders that went to tribunal. There's complaints that were going to decent homes contractors regarding improvements, and then enough of a detailed breakdown around subject matter. So we've requested that more information is added. It's a really good report, but we just wanted a bit more information. And then finally, something that we've all been working on, the Overview and Scrutiny Transparency Commission. The final report was put to the committee, and they accepted it. You've all heard me talk about the ambition of trying to move the council from where it was previously to become a beacon for transparency, openness and accountability. And we've set 3 goals ultimately for the council, that it, through the leadership, accepts that goal and makes a commitment to achieve it. And there's a number of sub-recommendations to get there by the end of the municipal year 17-18. We also believe that the challenges that are coming in local governments, but also following on from when the commissioners leave us, there will be a greater requirement for overview and scrutiny and the function to really support the council in the difficult decision making that will happen. And there's a real ambition that the function is extended, and we welcome the mayor's commitment to look into extending the function of the housing scrutiny role to meet with the mayor's election commitments, but we would like that to go further, and we'll have discussions with that through the governance working group. And then finally, I think we're just a little bit behind, but there is a real opportunity for us to get the borough to become open by default in terms of data. There are fantastic things happen. You look at global cities across the world where they even, there's local authorities that are doing fantastic, just getting information out there so people are able to understand in the difficult climate that we face in the future, or residents will be faced with many tough decisions. The more information they have to make informed decisions, the better we can be in supporting them. And there's a massive opportunity as well. We have Tech City on our doorstep. We should be linking in with them and trying to get the next generation who are already doing coding in schools to take the information that we put out there to help us meet our challenges. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for that. I think we don't have questions at this point, do we? We move on, indeed. But you wanted to speak on a couple of items later on. 4.2, call-ins. There are no call-ins this cycle. So we move on to 5.1, which is our borough plan. And I think Councillor Blake will introduce this item. So this is the local development plan for the borough, which name changes from week to week. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Mayor. I just want to highlight 3 elements of the report that's in front of you regarding the local plan. First is the reasons that we're bringing forward a local plan. The second is the process so far to bring forward the document and the consultation going forward. And the third is the status of the document. There are 3 reasons that we need to bring forward a local plan. First is demographic and environmental changes. Second is policy changes at a national and regional level. And third is the vision that this administration would like to set for the borough. So our population was estimated to be 284,000 in 2014, and it's expected to increase by 13% to reach 320,000 in 2023. And we need to respond to that change. The number of jobs is expected to increase by 169,000 between 2010 and 2031. And to add to those quite clear demographic changes, we should also note that the way that people shop and use their high streets is changing, making it even more important that we do everything we can to support local retailers and create thriving local parades. I'm sure you all were shocked by yesterday's standard announcement that 29,000 Tower Hamlets children go to school where they inhale nitrogen dioxide levels higher than the annual recommended amount, and so our local plan will be addressing air quality as well. We also need to note technological changes in the way that we can manage waste on sites in order that new development and current development is as sustainable as possible. In policy terms, there's new national planning legislation called the National Planning Policy Framework, and most significantly really for us is the London Plan annual housing target has increased from 2,885 annually to 3,931. Very important one at the end of that. The third reason to bringing forward a new local plan is to set a vision and to have a conversation with residents about the kind of place that we want to live in. The pace of change in Tower Hamlets is significant. The Mayor has set out our response to that in his forward. The scale of development is striking, and it's crucial that local authorities work with local people to articulate a vision and to understand what the scale of that development could mean in terms of its design and density. It means we have to think really creatively about open spaces and the quality of places. Also, in relation to our vision, we need to think really carefully about what regeneration means in Tower Hamlets. We need to understand the kind of place that we want Tower Hamlets to be and the role that regeneration can play in improving the quality of where we live. And there's particular reference to that on page 75. In terms of the process that this document has been through so far, there's been extensive consultation amongst officers via a cross-departmental working group. There was an all-members seminar last month. I note, and in terms of the status of the document, this is a consultation document running formally from the 14th of December to the 8th of February. This is 8 weeks. The statutory requirement would have been 6 weeks. I note that there's been a suggestion of an extension to 12 weeks. That could have quite a significant impact on our ability to bring the plan to complete the plan within the timescale, which is by autumn 2017. So since the document has been publicly available for a week before now as a cabinet paper, and it will be available for 2 weeks before the consultation formally opens, which is the 14th of December, that gets us up to 11 weeks. And so I wonder whether or not the Overview and Scrutiny Committee will consider that a reasonable compromise. The Overview and Scrutiny Committee has requested a large-scale promotion. I believe that it was featured in East End Life this week. I haven't quite had the time to check. And that promotion and consultation events are set out within the document. The document will be available at all idea stores, and there are special events taking place throughout the borough at the beginning of next year, including a Saturday morning at the Victoria and Albert Museum of Childhood. Finally, there have been questions about whether the Council has local planning standards. It does within its managing development document, and whether we have the ability to insist on particular area guidelines. I think this is an excellent opportunity for us to work together across departments to look at the way that building standards and guidelines are incorporated into planning policy to make sure those particular building bulletins relate to child play space within schools. So this is an excellent opportunity for us to work together to make sure that school play space is as good as it possibly can be. And it's a great read. I recommend it.
Yeah, me too. So I forgot. Well, I don't know if I forgot. I think retrospectively, you could make your questions from ONS, Councillor Pearce. I have them on the order paper, but you're very welcome to maybe both present your 4 questions and respond to the preemptive answering of them by Councillor Blake.
Yeah, I welcome that. I think going forward, and maybe in the community engagement strategy, we need to consider whether having any consultations over the Christmas festive breaks is a good way of engaging. And we had a discussion probably about blocking out the whole month of August as well, if we're truly going to try and engage. But I do welcome what it looks like now, 12 weeks. I think we also had a discussion about how fundamental and the true impact of the plan will be, and I haven't seen the clipping in East End Life, but it's just a clipping, and we were saying actually this is so fundamental to the future of our community that it should be probably half of the paper in terms of going into the issues that we'll face. You know, we get this all the time on the doorstep. So many people, you're getting hundreds of people turning up to meetings around regeneration, for or against it, and so on. I think there's a real opportunity to get our money's worth with East End Life on this, and to really extend the vision so people can fully understand it as it goes to every doorstep. Point 3 was actually more detailed. It was around local planning standards for playgrounds. And I know on STC and committees that there's a real ambition to get as much play space, and there was a view around trying to get a local standard for that, because there was a view that some of the stuff coming through was quite basic. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
So thanks for that. It leaves me wondering how on earth we're going to survive without East End Life. But anyway, but that's as and when it ceases to publish as a weekly newspaper. But it's going to be fortnightly from Christmas. Do you want to respond to any of the points Councillor Pearce has said? You don't have to, by the way.
Thanks for the clarification on the standards. Standards, as I understand, and I just looked at planners, standards have slightly less weight than policy. So it may be that we want to look at policy on this rather than standards. But I think the role of child play space in development is something that's really crucial that we grasp, and that I work with Councillor Saunders on the detail of this. But I just want to make sure that we're not speaking at cross purposes about local planning standards, because my understanding is that local planning policy would have more weight. And also, I don't think any of the planning officers are the editors of East End Life, so I'm sure they anticipated a full-page spread, but were very disappointed to only get a cutting.
And just before other members come in, if they need to, I'm pretty well. Just to place in the context, in case people wonder what's going on with this. At this stage, this is a early stage document which basically poses the questions that we think need to be explored and answered in preparation of the local plan. And then around about Easter next year, the local plan itself in a draft form will be published, and then there'll be a longer period of consultation. And then eventually, having received that and analysed it, there will then be a public inquiry involving an inspector. And as Rachel has said, it will take about 2 years to reach that final sort of point. I was wondering if Mr. Delvey needed to add anything, or whether his officers needed to add anything at this stage.
I don't need anything.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So I had Councillor Saunders and Councillor Whitelock Gibbs.
Because I was at Open School last night myself, I just wanted to clarify the two kind of separate but linked issues that were discussed. So one was in relation to the building standards that have been put in here. I think what we discussed, and it was actually coming out of the scrutiny review that we were discussing in the meeting, was we have a particular set of standards that we build to if a school is coming forward as a part of a development that we have a strong influence on. There's something different, which is that, say, a free school takes over a particular building, whether that would need to adhere to the same standards and whether there's something we can do in planning to make sure that every school, regardless of whether it's a development that we've been involved in or another building which becomes a school, is to the highest possible standards. So that was one set of kind of discussion which we should speak about further. The other one was in more general terms in kind of play space in developments, both having adequate play space for children, especially as new housing or other developments are conceived of, and having the best possible proposals go to committee, but also for us to develop our own point of view as to what really excellent play space looks like, which again is something that would be great to work on more.
Thanks, Mayor. Just really briefly wanted to say that I welcome the focus on health that's explicit in the local plan documents, particularly following the conversations we've had in pre-meetings, and not just the air pollution point that Councillor Blake highlighted, but also around green space and connectivity to promote walking and cycling, and the points around building quality and homes that actually promote health rather than harm people's health. So I look forward to taking that forward with colleagues in Cabinet.
Okay, anybody else? Gosh, you hadn't indicated, but I'm very happy to receive you at this point, if you want.
I'd like to support what Councillor Pearce said earlier. I did find an East End Life. Andrew Wood. So I did find on the bottom of page 9, the script about the local plan. I missed it the first time I went through. I looked back in 2013 when we last did a local plan on the Isle of Dogs. There were 3 public meetings. There are 40,000 people who live on the island. Only 7 people attended. I think we need to improve that in the next round of public consultations. Thank you.
Well, I'm pretty sure if you have your way, there will be more than 7 people at Isle of Dogs meetings on planning, which I welcome, by the way. Are we happy? There's no other comments, I don't think. So I'm very happy to agree the recommendation set out in the report as clarified by Councillor Blake in her answers to the questions from O&S. So we're trundled forwards. As I said, we're going to jump over 5.2 and go to 5.3 next, which is, I think it's fair to say this has attracted more public interest than maybe some people anticipated. I think it's very, very healthy that this is the case. So the report is about neighbourhood planning, improving area and forum applications, and it includes a general adoption of a policy. But there are 3 specific applications, one for the Spitalfields area, one for the Limehouse area, and one for the Isle of Dogs. And I think I'm right in saying that there have been no representations or desire to speak about the Limehouse part of this, which is fine. It's a splendid proposal, but we have representations about Spitalfields and also about the Isle of Dogs. And Councillor Andrew Wood has asked to speak on this item. Before that, though, I think it's for Amy Whitelock, not Rachel Blake, isn't it? Again, sorry, I get. Carry on, Rachel.
Just briefly to introduce the report, to draw your attention to the role of neighbourhood plans and the regulations under which we work with them. They're governed by, set out at 3.1. The Localism Act 2011 sets out the regulations under which we work with neighbourhood planning. To welcome neighbourhood planning as a principle, I think there have been some really positive outcomes from the neighbourhood planning plans that we have seen so far in Tower Hamlets, and to say that we realise the benefits that these plans can potentially have for drawing people into discussing the future of their areas. I think in terms of the conversation that we may be about to have, the most important parts of the report for you to reflect on are Appendix 1, the area appraisals and maps. The recommendations is first to recognise a neighbourhood planning forum, which has to meet certain criteria, and then to recognise their area, which they are responsible for identifying themselves, which the forum is responsible for identifying. I think it's probably best to go to speakers and to representations now, and then we can summarise, but also to take the opportunity to thank officers for their ongoing work with trying to bring these forums and areas into life.
Okay, so I think just to again state the context of this, we have representations about 2 of the 3 areas, both about Spitalfields and about the Isle of Dogs area. My starting point is I'm minded to agree the recommendations in front of us, but equally I know that there's some fairly strong views which might suggest that we might want to defer one or both of those areas in order to get the boundaries right. I don't think it'd be quite right, because I think the concerns are primarily in the case of the Isle of Dogs about boundaries. In the case of Spitalfields, there's also some concern about the neighbourhood planning area and its principle as a business planning forum. So if we take Councillor Andrew Wood next, is it Wood or Woods? There's only one of you. Okay, good. Okay, that's more than enough. Carry on.
Actually, there are a lot of Andrew Woods. I did discover last year that there are 7 Andrew Woods in Bangkok, Thailand, so we do get around. But I'm here in my capacity of the Isle of Dogs Neighbourhood Planning Forum. I should also declare, as well as being the councillor for Canary Wharf Ward, I'm also secretary of the forum as well, and I have some of my other committee members sat behind me. We actually submitted our application exactly to the day 12 months ago. Government guidance suggests this process should take 3 to 4 months. Council's own documentation says this process should take 3 to 4 months. And here we are 12 months later, still waiting to be recognised. It's important to state that this process is meant to be resident-led, but we also have many local businesses in our area as well. We also have businesses involved in our forum, including the Telecity operation just next door to us as well. And we really want to get recognised. We've just been sort of twiddling our thumbs for the last 12 months, because a lot of things, a lot of good work we'd like to do. We'd like to be working on the local plan. We'd like to be working in the Opportunity Area Planning Framework, but we still getting stuck on this issue of recognition. And I think officers have accepted that we meet all of the criteria. The only issue is our external boundaries and also the internal area, because in consultation with Canary Wharf Group, the decision was made to actually exclude the Canary Wharf Group estate. One of the reasons for that is that if we did come to a referendum, is because there's 110,000 people working at Canary Wharf, they'd actually outvote residents. And I don't think they wanted to kind of experiment to see what businesses would do compared to residents. There's been a few other issues over the last 24 hours. There's been lots of changes, but we very much would like to insist that, this has been going on for 12 months. We went through our public consultation back in January and February of this year. There have been problems today simply because we had conversations 14 months ago and people have forgotten what they agreed 14 months ago. And the longer we delay this, the worse it gets. And the key issue is, residents have been waiting for this for 12 months. What do we say to residents if we don't agree this tonight? Another month, another 2 months. Development is ongoing. We really need to get this neighbourhood plan recognised. And we really urge you to recognise us tonight. And we're willing to work with all of the people who have got issues about the areas, that we can maybe at a later stage redraw or fine-tune some of the areas or make some agreements about that. We're very open and transparent. And people like Canary Wharf Group can now be full members of our forum as well, because we've opened up membership to them, and they can influence exactly what's in our neighbourhood plan. So please, Mayor, recognise us tonight. Thank you.
Are there any questions of Councillor Wood, just to clarify what he said? I'm fairly clear that I'd like us to recognise a forum for the Isle of Dogs. What I'm less clear about is that we have a clear proposition in front of us about the boundaries. I know you have a very clear proposition. I know our officers have presented a slightly different proposition. I know that Canary Wharf Group have presented a slightly different variant as well on the precise boundaries of their exclusion from this area, and that leaves us in a bit of a quandary. Can you explain how we can both satisfy that quandary and recognise you at the same time?
I think the only real issue is left to do with Canary Wharf Group and the boundaries of what we're proposing to exclude. And I think the key area, 2 key areas, one is Wood Wharf and the other one is North Quay. So 2 points I'd like to make is, first of all, Canary Wharf Group can join as full members and therefore have an influence over the neighbourhood plan. Second point I'd like to make is that both of those areas have full planning permission. So nothing, if we, we're not planning to do anything anyway, but even if we wanted to, we couldn't affect those areas in our neighbourhood plan because we can't retrospectively change planning permissions. but we're quite happy to work with Canary Wharf Group to fine-tune the area. And, for example, just because North Quay is actually in the area doesn't actually mean we have to write anything into our neighbourhood plan. We could choose to exclude it from our final plan. And we're happy to talk with them and have a relationship, and we've been talking to them for 15 months now.
I guess I'm acutely aware that where land and property are concerned, very expensive lawyers tend to be about 3 feet behind them. So I'm a bit wary about agreeing this at this moment without being absolutely clear about the boundaries. But I'm very much wedded to the principle of agreeing that we recognise the Forum for the Isle of Dogs with the powers that you're suggesting. Councillor Blake, are you roughly on the same place as I am? Councillor Blake's nodding in agreement. Councillor Wood.
I would like to point out this is all backed up by an Act of Parliament, the 2011 Localism Act, and that makes it very clear that actually that Act of Parliament doesn't describe a role for landowners or developers. It's actually completely silent on the issue. It's actually up to residents and businesses in the area to make the decision, which they've made to include those areas. And there is lots of casework out there where, yes, businesses have objected, but actually they've been accepted in the end. So I don't see why we have to be afraid. We're happy to work with Canary Wharf Group. We've always had a good relationship with them, both me personally and the Forum as well. I don't see why we should always be so afraid of what developers say or threaten to do to us.
I'm not remotely afraid of Canary Wharf. They're very nice people, I'm sure. But Councillor Blake.
I think I've seen probably about 5 maps and boundaries today in terms of the options that we have in front of us, and I'm not sure how the Forum could have kept up with all of those if they weren't seeing it. So I would worry, like the Mayor, about making any decisions now, given how much people might have been able to see.
There is only one map approved by residents.
Okay. I would note, though, that there do seem to be about 3 positions. So that's the one in the paper before you, which is coterminous with the 3 Isle of Dogs wards and Poplar Ward. There's the request from the Forum, and then there is now a map brought in front of us with a slightly larger exclusion zone from Canary Wharf. So even if you have seen 5 maps, I think there's at least 3 proposals in front of us. I entirely appreciate the frustration that you want to be recognised. I just wonder whether we can make a if we don't decide to approve today, whether we can make a commitment to get all the players around the room in the next 2 weeks in order to come to some kind of conclusion.
Yeah, we're ready and waiting.
Well, you get a free hit in denouncing us for not agreeing, whatever it was you think we should be denouncing this evening. But we're very. One thing I want to clarify is if there was any perception that the previous incumbent of this office was in some way wanting to delay this, that does not apply to myself. I'm very happy to get on with this. I just need to get it right, and I find what I have in front of me a little bit confusing.
That's because people have made it confusing. There is only one document and only one map which residents of the Isle of Dogs have voted for, which they voted for on the 26th of November last year, which is the only map that actually counts. I know lots of other people have thrown in maps, and there's been lots of confusion over the last 24 hours, and there's been meetings with other councillors. They don't count. The only people who count are the residents who all unanimously stuck up their hands in a meeting over a year ago, and nothing has changed since then.
Can we just clarify who wants to speak on these items, on this item, Mr. Mannion?
Okay. I apologise if I get this wrong. I have a Jason Zaloof. Yep.
Okay, we'll come to that a bit later then. Yeah.
And there was also a potential David Donahue, but I think he was about Spitalfields as well.
Right. Okay. And Mr. Dorber hasn't requested to speak from the Canary Wharf. No.
I think we did request to speak from the letter from DP9.
Okay. So if we're talking about the Isle of Dogs, then could we ask if Mr. Dorber wants to approach the table and tell us not his side of the story, but why he's made representations on behalf of Canary Wharf Group? For the record, this is Howard Dorber, who represents Canary Wharf Group.
Hello, and Howard Dorber from Canary Wharf Group. You've all got a letter in front of you from DP9. We have been in discussion with the council and with Councillor Woods and the Neighbourhood Forum for some time. Our issue is not about the neighbourhood forum in principle, and in fact there's a very good argument for the whole of Canary Wharf to be included within the neighbourhood forum area, or all of it to be excluded. Our concern is that the map that's in front of you is neither the map that was produced by the forum nor what we wanted, which was for the primary development sites for Canary Wharf to be excluded from the plan. For example, one of the boundaries goes through the middle of two of our buildings on the officers' plan, because it follows the current line of the dock edge on Heron Quays, rather than the buildings which are not only consented but are actually under construction now, which go over that line. So we have a building that would be half in and half in outside of the neighbourhood plan area. So the map that's in the Cabinet papers, we think doesn't make a lot of sense in some places. We certainly do not want to delay this, and I have enormous sympathy with Councillor Wood and the need to move it along. If there is a way in which the forum can be approved in principle, and we can perhaps look at the boundaries pretty rapidly to move things along, I wouldn't want to hold up the decision. So, but our position is set out in the DP9 paper.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know how much help that is. That's fairly helpful, yes. If we could find a way, we've got the finest legal minds in this building at this table, and they can perhaps help us to clarify whether we could agree something in principle and then the boundaries later on. Strikes me as a bit risky.
We would be okay with that.
But we could maybe agree a boundary through a mayoral decision, which could then be called in and challenged if it wasn't agreeable to the different parties who are interested. Councillor Blake.
We considered whether or not a forum could be adopted without an area, or vice versa, and I just wondered whether officers could share their view on whether or not that would be appropriate, or the risks, if any.
If I can assist, my understanding is one of these devices, I think. The advice I've received is it would be preferable to both recognise and define a boundary on the same occasion.
In which case, I'm very happy to agree the principle of this, and then it will have to come back through either a mayoral executive decision, which could then be called in, or to the next meeting of the Cabinet, which will be some way in the future. But we can get a move on with this, though. Is that agreeable to everybody? Yeah, there we are. Stunned into silence. Okay. You happy, Councillor Blake?
Yeah.
So if we now move on to the Spitalfield, I don't think there are any other representations on the Isle of Dogs proposal, and there are none on Limehouse. So Spitalfields, we have Jason Zaloof, or a representative from Zaloof, who own... Okay, well, my view was that given that there haven't been any representations, and given that it seems a pretty uncontentious proposal, we should be happy to agree it this evening. So unless you want to talk us out of that, I suggest you don't. Yep. Yep. Okay, that's helpful. Right, so in case that wasn't picked up by our otherwise glorious microphones, our speaker from the Limehouse Community Forum is happy for us to agree the slightly revised boundaries for Limehouse, which I think are just a bit of housekeeping, really. Okay. If we move then onwards, or sideways, to Spitalfields, we have representations from a speaker on behalf of Zaloofs, who own the Truman's Brewery site. And do you want to approach the table and speak on this?
Thank you. I've got a few points, but I'll try and rattle through them. I'll happily move over there.
Which way?
Yeah,
Do you want to sit in?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yes, I've got a few points, but I'll try and rattle through them relatively quickly. So I'm from the old Truman Brewery site on Brick Lane. I'd first like to flag that we think that the Cabinet report is rather misleading in relation to the level of objection to the proposed Spitalfields planning forum. It refers to 23 representations in favour of the forum and only 5 in objection. In fact, there were over 600 individual letters of objection, as well as 2 separate objecting petitions with 900 plus and 600 plus signatures each. I'd also like to draw your attention to the fundamental change in the nature of the proposals from a neighbourhood area to a business neighbourhood area, which means that the forum will, if designated, be primarily focused on increasing economic activity. And I'm not questioning whether that in itself is a good or a bad thing. However, the forum was initially promoted to the public with a very clear focus on conservation and protection. And I've been advised that following such a fundamental change to into a business neighboured area, that it's legally necessary that the public should be reconsulted about this change. I'd also like to stress that we firmly believe that the current proposed boundary for the forum is not coherent in land use or in terms of its physical character, which is a requirement of legislation. As the different parts of the proposed area have very conflicting priorities and aspirations, we believe that the forum will not be able to find a consensus and that a neighboured plan will not be deliverable, which would result in a waste of public resources. Finally, I'd like to say I'm very much in favour of the concept of neighbourhood planning, provided that it's brought forward for an area which is coherent in terms of land use and physical characteristics. And with this in mind, we've proposed an alternative area boundary for the Spitalfields Forum. And I'd add that these 600 plus letters of objection in fact support this alternative area, as does the petition, which has over 900 signatures. A map of the alternative area was unfortunately not included in the Cabinet report. However, I have circulated copies to members, and I brought hard copies with me if need be. The alternative area, we believe, is coherent and would be able to deliver a neighbourhood plan. And I'd request that members please consider bringing this alternative area forward for designation. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any questions of our representative from Zaloof Partnership?
Hi. Can I ask why where you're basing your advice that that there's been a change to a business area, the advice that would require a reconsultation?
The change in the nature of the forum is a factual matter. The proposals have changed from a neighboured area to a business neighbourhood area. I don't think that's in question. We've received advice from DP9 and also from Landmark Chambers, who are planning specialists with, and the council has a speciality in neighbourhood forums.
Well, I'm a little bit grumpy, first of all, because I wasn't aware of this objection. Grumpy for 2 reasons. First is that Mr. Donoghue emailed me earlier today. I know Mr. Donoghue, and said he was minded to come and speak, and I said, you probably don't need to worry because we don't seem to have any objections. It seems like a fairly uncontentious proposal. So he hasn't come, unless he's hiding there. Although we have 1 or 2 people from Spitalfields here. And the second reason is because this email was timed at 9:56 last night, and it didn't appear in our report, to my knowledge, the scale of objection. Doesn't, does it? No. So given that, however, it has petitions dated February 2015 and appears to show a strength of feeling, I feel a bit bemused about whether we can actually consider this proposal this evening without us taking some further views on the matter. But maybe there's an officer who can clarify why we haven't been advised of this previously. Who can help us?
Ladylike balancing act here. With regards to the objection letters, I think one of the appendices will set out the consultation summaries. So we have that covered in Appendix 5, and within that it details the nature of the objections, and that two came in almost petition formats, and one of those petitions included 603 signed pro forma letters. So they were a standard letter produced and signed by the public. They weren't people providing us with their name and address. So that's how we've considered them, and that's how we consider things for any policy matters or development management applications. And that's covered. I think the point about the advice from Landmark Chambers, I guess when it comes to designation of business areas, the authority has a duty when considering the application to consider whether the area should be considered a business designation, and effectively it means if the area is wholly or predominantly business in nature. I guess one of the defining characteristics of the area certainly conveyed to us from the Neighbourhood Forum was that very strong commercial element in the neighbourhood, and we felt that the regulations, though they're not very detailed, indicated we should apply the business designation to this area, and we have done that, made that recommendation. Now, I think as the Mayor said earlier, and the mention of lawyers, you know, the ears of local authority officers always pick up at that point, and I think it would be sensible for us to, if you could share the view from Landmark Chambers on it, from the legal point of things, and perhaps, Mayor, we should take a little bit of time to consider that.
Okay, that's a version of helpful. Thank you very much.
If I can just respond on one point, the letters were each individually. They weren't all the same, and every single letter had a name and address at the top of it. So it wasn't the case that there was just a squiggle at the bottom. Every single letter had the person's name, address, and if it was a business, the business name and address. And I'd just like to point that out.
Okay, well, I think I'm allowed to be grumpy, but I think we should probably delay this until the January Cabinet meeting, because I don't feel sufficiently confident that the strength of representation has been adequately rebutted in the report in front of us. And I regret that, because I'd like to get a move on. We don't have a general right of audience at these meetings, I'm afraid. There's someone waving at the back of the room. So where that gets us to is, are there any other comments from other members of the Cabinet? In that case, in reverse order of difficulty, can I suggest we agree the recommendations of the report in general, but as regards the three proposed designations, we agree to designate Limehouse as a neighbourhood planning forum with the area and amendments as in Appendix 3. On the Isle of Dogs, we agree the principle of designating a neighbourhood planning forum, but that we need to go away and just make sure that we are 100% happy with the boundaries for that, and that I would be minded to issue that as a mayoral decision, which could then be challenged and scrutinised. And as regards Spitalfields, I'm for the third time I'm grumpy about this. I want the principle of designating a neighbourhood planning forum, but I think we need to go away and take further advice and possibly come back in January on that proposal. Is that I'm the only decision maker here, aren't I? So do I agree with myself? I agree with myself more or less, sufficiently to a level that I've made that decision. Yep. Okay.
Just to be clear, on the Spitalfields, there's no in-principle decision. There isn't.
There's an in-principle decision, yes. Yes, yeah. Is that okay? Thank you.
Chair, with apologies, I've should have left 10 minutes ago for childcare reasons, so can I ask that we bring up 5.7 so I can just quickly present that report before ducking out.
You did give me notice of this, and I sort of anticipated these items would take quite a long time. If people need to leave having done that item, please feel free to go. 5.7, which is the Successful Town Centre Scrutiny Challenge Report. Councillor Peck.
Thank you. I'm in the fortunate, if rather odd, position of both having been the scrutiny member who carried out this report and now the Cabinet member who is responsible for implementing it. I carried out this scrutiny report because I think our town centres are very important. They're the places where our communities come together. They have those casual meetings that form the building blocks of social capital and cohesion. They're places that make our communities good places to live, to socialise, to work, and they provide over 10,000 jobs. But I think all over the country, retail town centres are under a lot of pressure, changing retail habits, from business rates, from the pressure to convert to residential. And so we need to be clear as an authority that if we value our town centres, we need to be doing as much as we can to support them. And so this scrutiny review sets out a number of recommendations, predominantly that create a vision and a plan for each town centre about what we want to do, how we want to make sure that the town centre meets the needs of its local population. It sets out a whole series of interventions and support for those town centres, and then it has a package of planning measures to try and arrest some of the challenges that town centres have. I think it's an excellent piece of work. I look forward to implementing it. I thank officers, particularly Vicky Allen, who supported me in doing this and got it this far. I think the response is proportionate and appropriate. I would like some of it to be faster and more far-reaching. I will continue to push for that, but I think it will make a real difference to the town centres that make our communities a special place to live.
Does anyone else need to speak on this item? In that case, I'm happy to agree the recommendations and to wish Councillor Pecker a joyful evening as well. Thank you. So we now move back to item 5.2, which is the community. Is it the community buildings? Yes, community buildings. Community buildings is a massively contentious area potentially, but we've been giving quite a lot of thought to this, and actually it doesn't have to be that contentious. It's potentially quite technical because there are all manner of community buildings in the borough, and they are configured in different ways and on different rental agreements, and there has been a historic lack of consistency. In conversation with our beloved commissioners, we've been talking about the community buildings and how we should manage them, and it's for the Cabinet Member for Strategic Development to present this item. Is that right? It says it's not, is it? It's for the Cabinet Member for Resources. I thought it was the Cabinet Member for Resources. And so, do you want to do that, Councillor Edgar?
Yes, thank you. So, as John has said, we have a number of community buildings, 79 in fact, and that those buildings are of a wide variety of shapes and conditions and location. And what we do need to do is make sure that the buildings are used, I think, as much as possible, and that they're also in a decent condition. We also need to make sure that there are clear agreements in place that govern the buildings, the terms, conditions, responsibilities of the different parties involved in any particular building. And what we also want is to be in a situation where we've got a fair charging arrangement which recognises where appropriate the community benefit that's being provided by the users of the building. So this document is one that sets out a framework to achieve all of those things. It will involve a review of each of the buildings and each of the groups involved in using the buildings, and some of those conversations will be interesting, I think. But by the end of the process, we should have a much clearer framework and picture in place for each building and set of users there. What it also does as a report is to outline the fact that we need to agree a way of assessing the community benefit. So a report will come back next year which proposes a way in which we assess community benefit and therefore can take account of the community benefit that's been provided by particular groups in setting the rent that needs to be charged for those buildings. So this report has taken a lot of work to get to, and there will be a lot of work that needs to take place as a part of that review, but I think it takes us a good way forward in making sure that we are using our community buildings in a clearer way, a better way, which everybody has a sort of a transparent framework to look at them within.
Councillor Saunders.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo what Councillor Egger has said in terms of the work that I hope to also be involved in terms of assessing and understanding community benefit and the impact that might potentially have in terms of rent levels. Also in terms of my kind of core responsibilities in children's services, I just particularly draw attention to the importance of officers having some real space to work out, for example, with playgroups and mother and toddler groups. There are some organisations which are absolutely businesses and should be charged a commercial rent, and some which are really kind of community organisations where parents support one another, and just emphasise the importance of us having some space to work that through in terms of the use of our assets to support different organisations.
Councillor Blake.
I've received some representations about support for organisations who will be having to go through a more formal process now. I wonder whether you can say anything about what might be available.
Well, the review will take place building by building, group by group, and I think the Council recognises that there are going to be some people who need help in getting through that process, and it's also obvious that we need to make sure that the sorts of documents we send to people and the way in which we set out the guidance around them is stuff that's set out in a pretty quite straightforward way, so that people aren't sort of buried in legalese. There may be quite a lot of legalese and lots of legal documents there, but the framework, the explanations are provided so that people are really quite clear about what's needed of them and by when, and that there will be a conversation. So there will be lots of conversations. There will be at least 79 conversations that take place, and that's going to involve really quite a lot of work, but it will be done in a way which I hope means that all of those organisations, regardless of their sort of scale, are able to understand what's expected and to be clear about how they need to respond.
Councillor Sirislism.
Thank you. David, I think similarly as Councillor Saunders says, so I have faith communities in my portfolio, and there are a number of faith organisations, particularly mosques, who occupy community centres, old housing offices, commercial units, and there are differential rents that they all pay. So I'd be interested in kind of being involved in that process, just to kind of make sure there's some uniformity around the rent levels and the community benefits some of those organisations provide.
Yep, I recognise that there will be several Cabinet members with an interest in the outcome of this from particular perspectives, and we obviously need to make sure that those conversations take place to make sure all of those points are addressed. And you've mentioned there'll be a couple of points earlier today, and I'll follow those up with relevant officers to make sure that we're going in the right direction on those points.
Okay, so are there other comments from other members? Councillor Amy Whitelock-Gibbs.
Just very briefly, in relation to my portfolio, the point around looking at where there's people that we're commissioning that are also using a council asset to provide that service. So just making sure that I'm sure at officer level that will be linked up, but just to make sure all those dots are joined in the way that other people have mentioned about their own areas.
I agree, that needs to be joined up.
Okay, so it'd be quicker to summarise the Cabinet members who aren't interested in this item, and that's partly because it is politically quite a contentious issue in that there are many good voluntary organisations who occupy buildings and who go through periods of uncertainty about their tenancy, the condition of the building, whether they can afford it, whether they get a grant or not in order to be able to pay the rent for the building. All those things are quite material and important considerations. What this does, this report, I think, is to help to formalise and provide a framework so people can be a lot more certain. On the tricky issue of whether organisations should be offered a rent below the recommended market level, which would be for third sector organisations of various kinds, that's something which I'm recommending, and this report implicitly suggests should be considered as part of the grant thinking that we're doing, because if you're offering premises below a market level, then that is implicitly a grant and needs to be considered alongside the other factors when you're helping organisations. So that will come back to another exciting meeting. So unless there are any other observations, I'm happy to commend the recommendations to myself and to agree them. I'm going to try and find an infinite number of words that make this sound more important than it is. The Office of Mayor, that is. Okay, thank you very much. Should we move on then to item 5.4, which is the Health Visiting Service, and this is for Councillor Amy Whitelock-Gibbs to present.
Thanks.
Very briefly, of course.
Yeah, of course. So this paper recommends the award of 2 public health contracts for children aged 0 to 5. The health visiting service, which is a universal model of health visiting at certain stages of pregnancy and the early stages of a child's life. And secondly, family nurse partnership, which is a more targeted service for first-time mothers aged 19 or under, and continues until the child is 2. So really important services for our community. People might remember that we agreed to procure these contracts at a previous cabinet in the summer. This is part of the government's wider reforms to public health, where they've brought responsibility for these services to local authorities. Essentially, the paper sets out the procurement process in paragraphs 3.4 to 3.11, and also the strengths of each of the recommended bidders at 3.12 and 3.13. The recommended bidders for bidder for health visiting is Tower Hamlets GP Care Group Community Interest Company, with a sub-partnership with Compass Wellbeing CIC, and the recommended bidder for family nurse partnership and the more targeted service is Compass Wellbeing Community Interest Company, with a subcontracting relationship with the GP Care Group. So I won't go through in detail, but in terms of just both contracts, the real strengths that officers are highlighting are the level of local knowledge of both providers, their partnership approach that both are taking, and in relation to health visiting particularly, the proposals they have to integrate with other community services like children's centres, GPs, nurseries, and in relation to family nurse partnership, Compass Wellbeing already provide the school nursing programme, so they've got strong synergies with existing programmes and really strong expertise on emotional wellbeing. So they're the 2 recommended bidders, and I'm sure officers are here to take questions. And I don't know if Councillor Saunders wanted to add anything from a children's perspective. Obviously, it's slightly cross-cutting.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I know a lot of hard work has gone into this in the background, and this is quite a progressive development. And the good news is that the resources mean we can employ more people in the local service than we had before. And the bad news is that there's a man called Osborne who seems to make a habit of then cutting back those budgets. So it'll be fewer more people than we anticipated initially, and we need to be very watchful of our ability to continue to fund this service. But yeah, it's good stuff. So I'm happy to agree the recommendations in the report if there are no other comments members want to make. Okay, so thanks very much for that. So if we move on then to item 5.5, which is a slightly more convoluted history to it. Future commissioning arrangements for the domiciliary care services previously commissioned from Majlish Home Care Services. Again, Councillor Amy Whitelock-Gibbs.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is slightly more complicated than the last one, so I'll still try to...
Actually, before you say anything, we have a confidential appendix which has not been submitted within the 28 days and which we probably don't need, I think, given my anticipation of the way the debate progresses, to retire into a closed session to consider anyway. But can you just clarify the legal status of that?
Sorry, excuse me. Yes, so the exempt appendix was submitted correctly with the agenda, so from that point of view it's fine. But at the time, 28 days ago, when we published the forward plan notice, we didn't know there was going to be an exempt appendix, so we didn't inform the public at that stage. That means that if we are to go into closed session today, we will need the chair for ONS to agree for us to go into closed session.
But as I said, I don't anticipate us needing to do that. So, but just for the record, because these things can become contentious, particularly where contracts are involved.
Yeah. So the background to this, very briefly, is that Majlish was a home care provider which won quite a large contract with the council in 2012 to provide home care services. Very briefly, there were a number of concerns raised by the council, by the Care Quality Commission, and indeed by Majlish staff during 2013 about the management of the service, not about the day-to-day quality of care that was being delivered. I think it's important to stress that. As a result of those concerns, the contract was terminated in February of last year, so 2014, and the service was brought under the direct management of the council in order to stabilise that service and protect service users who were reliant on that home care. The intention at the time was to bring Majlish into the council for an interim period of 6 months. Unfortunately, as the Mayor alluded to at the beginning of the meeting, The previous administration didn't progress a resolution to the situation, and the failure to resolve this promptly and the series of delays under that administration have meant we've now had quite a significant period, around 18 months, where it's been in the council, and obviously creating uncertainty for staff and potentially for service users as well, although officers do stress that the service that is being provided by those home care workers throughout this period has continued to be good. Officers have developed 6 options for the future of the service, which are in the paper at Appendix 1. Recently, there's also been consultation meetings with staff, including trade union representatives. I think it's fair to say those meetings have been quite heated. There's a diversity of opinion among the current staff around the different options, but as the paper says, all were united around a key point around security of employment and knowing what's going to happen in the future. So in reaching the decision tonight, Mayor, as you know, we need to weigh a range of risks, including legal risks, but also financial risks, employment-related risks, and most importantly, retaining service continuity for users. One key point to stress is that we know that we need to re-procure all of the home care contracts, so not just the bit of the service that was brought in under the council for Majlish, but the other services that other providers like Apacen and other people that you may have heard of currently provide. And that's something that's a major priority for us, and the Mayor and I have asked for this to come forward to January Cabinet so that we can move forward with that procurement. It's really important that that happens across the whole of the home care sector, and in relation to some other commitments the Mayor has made around looking at ethical care and how we can make sure that service has the highest standards, treats its employees fairly and provides the best service for the users that rely on home care. Briefly wanted to suggest why we would rule out most of the options that are proposed by officers, and then see where people want to take the final decision. But in terms of the options in Appendix 1, which is, page 158. Thank you, Melanie. So in terms of those options, option C to F, we would recommend ruling out for various reasons. So option C, which is a suggestion we could tender just the Majlish services as a single block contract. In our view, that would make little sense when, as I've already outlined just now, we plan to do full re-procurement of all of the home care contracts and have authorisation to commence that in January. Option D, which is a proposal to allow the service or support the service to develop into a public sector mutual, sort of a cooperative model. Given the competitiveness of the home care market locally, well, in general as well, but particularly locally, this would create potential risks to the future sustainability of the service. And there's also quite significant differences of opinion among staff about this model, and for a public sector mutual option to work, it needs the staff to really lead that and drive that, and so there's a risk it wouldn't be viable. Option E is tendering for a separate preferred provider framework, which would sit alongside the current bigger provider framework, which again doesn't really make sense given we're going to do the full re-procurement of all of the home care contracts and the whole framework from January. And then option F would be retaining the service in-house for the long term, which the assessment from officers is would not be best value given the financial constraints we're under as a council, and also jars with the previous decisions that we've made to outsource the rest of the home care service. So those options we would suggest shouldn't be taken forward. There's, as the Mayor alluded to, the legal advice in the restricted appendix, which members will have seen. Given that advice and ongoing kind of feedback we're having from staff, it seems A and B are the kind of only potential options. But given we're taking a decision in January about the whole re-procurement of home care, it might be prudent for us to have further conversation about A and B, given that legal advice, Mayor, and then make the final decision in January.
Well, I'm minded to support that, but we had a request from the public, from Jabida Ali, who's the CEO of Three Sisters Care, to speak at this meeting. Yes. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, one is specifically, sorry, am I allowed a two-part question? The other guy did speak. So, One part is specifically about Majlis, and the other part is related to the overall tender. If I can speak about the Majlis thing first, just because it's related, I think you guys really like making things difficult for yourself, don't you? Because what happened when Majlis went down was a whole bunch of the clients who we know, because we run a care agents in the borough, and all the owners, like myself and my sisters, were from the borough. A whole bunch of people said, oh, we'd like to go with Three Sisters Care. And I'm sure it wasn't just us. I'm sure there are other care agencies that people said we'd like to go with. Now, the only reason that we started a care agency in the borough, obviously I've done my market research, is because people are allowed to choose. The law gives them the right to choose a provider they want. So how come when Majlis went down and there was all of this kerfuffle, and people said there's an existing organisation, half of Majlis staff work for us anyway, why weren't they allowed to use a provider of their choice? That's actually against the law. We don't have a contract with Hackney. We work with a lot of people on direct payments there. Or Barking and Dagenham, we work with a lot. All across London, we work with people using direct payments. Tower Hamlets is the only place where apparently we're not allowed. It doesn't make any sense. And it's not just the Majlis ones. There are loads of other organisations. So we work, we deliver work for the NHS as well. So we might work the NHS, say, for a year with a client, and then when the funding transfers to social services, obviously the family want to stay with us. They know the carers, they know all of us lot, all the managers, and they're told they're not allowed because we're not on the commission list. Again, that's not correct. So why does it happen over and over and over again when the family has said we have a relationship with the workers, we want continuity of service? Someone in Town Council says no, you're not allowed. I mean, it's just I just don't understand. Okay, so quickly on the overall tender, can someone please explain the real reason it was cancelled? Because the reasons he gave us were utterly spurious.
The reasons what was cancelled? Sorry.
The overall home care tender for Tower Hamlets. One of the reasons, for example, was that, the law changed, so we have to redo this all over again. The law didn't change. The law changed before you announced the tender. So why is that a reason? Other companies, other councils, including the NHS actually, a lot of them announced their tenders at the same time, the summer this year, and they were all able to incorporate the New Care Act. So, I mean, it just seems completely spurious, and I'd really like to find out what the real, genuine reason is, please.
And so would I, but I think and I mean that genuinely, because if you press your button, otherwise it gets into a mess. You can come back in a minute. I think our Acting Director of Adult Social Care, or Adult Services, can answer your questions technically proficiently.
Right, thank you for coming and presenting your questions tonight. It's in two parts, as you note. There's a historical context to this, which sounds very unfortunate. In reality, people are entitled to personalised budgets and indeed direct payments, and we wouldn't stop anyone in receipt of a direct payment from using your service. If you've got specific examples of that, we would certainly like to know which cases they are, so that we can follow that up, because it's our policy and our practice not to prevent anyone with a direct payment from purchasing the care that they choose, wherever they choose to purchase it from. Did you want to add anything to that, Councillor?
Only really to add that I think I have similar queries from people sometimes about, I would like to go to a different agency and the council says I can't, or from other providers. So I understand your points. I think it's important to distinguish between personal budgets, where so everyone has their money obviously allocated to them in relation to their needs. Some people choose to take a direct payment, and as Luke has said, can then go and use any provider that they choose, which is absolutely in line with the Care Act, as you've said, and that's a legal right for users. If people have a personal budget that's still held by the council, we then allocate their care package on the commissioned preferred provider list, which, as I mentioned earlier, we are committed to re-tendering that as soon as possible, which is obviously your second question. And I suppose on that, Luke can comment on the detail, but my view would be, I agree with you, it should have been dealt with sooner. It's very frustrating that it's taken so long, and I'm sure providers feel that frustration. So we are putting that right, and we will be bringing the authorisation to take forward that re-procurement of all of the contracts to the January Cabinet.
Okay. And to emphasise that, there's a lot of historical context here that sounds very unfortunate and not quite right, and we're very keen to remedy that as soon as possible, hence the January Cabinet, which will take it forward.
Thank you very much, but I might be too big and famous to apply for a Town Hamlets tender by then.
So, are there any other members who wish to speak on this item? Can I thank Ms. Ali for making representations to the meeting? I'm very clear that I'm not going to spend my life criticising previous mayors or mayors of any shape or form, but I'm very clear that people have got the perfect right to having individual budgets, and that we should facilitate that. And I've no reason to think that anything in the past has stopped that happening, but I'd be very happy to hear any representations. Also, you wrote to me in the last week suggesting, I think, that we meet. I referred this to Councillor Amy Whitelock-Gibbs, but I'm very happy to sit down with you and Councillor Gibbs to talk through your aspirations. But obviously they would be alongside the aspirations of any other tenderer. So, you know, we can't give, we have to be transparent and follow the rules. And of course that's what we'll do. But thanks very much for coming. Councillor Amy Whitelock-Gibbs has spoken extensively on this item, and I don't think anyone else wishes to speak, in which case I'm happy to agree the recommendations as outlined by Councillor Amy Whitelock-Gibbs, which are that we are, just for the record, we're ruling out options C, D, E and F, I think, at this stage, and we are aiming to receive a report to retender the service in January of next year. And I think that's correct. Our Director of Law, Probity and Governance is looking nervously to check we got our... But it's not about getting the wording right. That's basically what we want to do. We want to retender starting the process.
Subject to you considering options A and B at your next meeting.
Indeed. Yes, absolutely. So if we can move on then. Thanks for that. And that's... hopefully that's... I've got a feeling it won't be the last of these sort of over-delayed decisions, but it's certainly one of the bigger ones, and it's taken a lot of conversations outside the meeting to get on top of, and we'll probably take one or two more as well. Item 5.6, which is the scrutiny review report, and the person presenting this will be Councillor Rachel Saunders, I think. Yeah. Indeed.
It's a good scrutiny review, and there's a set of recommendations which we're taking on, and an action plan. I think it sits in the context of all the work we're doing to strengthen our early service and to work closely with our schools to improve literacy and across the kind of provision of further education, much of which we don't provide ourselves, but that which we do and that which we can work in partnership to improve literacy. There are two scrutiny questions which I wanted to respond to now, and I mean it's up to you, obviously, Chair, how the Chair of Scrutiny can follow up on that if he would like to. But one which was on sorry, I'm just finding the questions themselves. So one of them was on the triage tool.
Should we be kind to Councillor Pearson, given the opportunity to ask the questions himself, because I forgot to do that the last time we had a... Yeah, okay.
Okay, so the triage tool is a skills match tool which was about supporting Idea Store and other frontline staff to provide guidance to support residents into training and employment. So there's a slight disjuncture between my description of the tool and the role it seems to have played in the scrutiny report, and therefore in the scrutiny question about adults with poor reading skills who cannot read prescriptions, because it doesn't in itself provide support with literacy. It's a tool to kind of get people in the right direction in terms of the literacy provision or training that they might then have access to. It's a tool that Skills Match have chosen to stop. So I'm sure that it will come within the broad kind of scope of Councillor Peck's work, and I'd be very glad to work with him to think more generally about how we can make the use of the very limited resources we have to support with ESOL and language needs. The other question, which was about the nurseries, and good early education. So the answer to that is that good early education is led by qualified teachers, is provided in 60 of our local authority primary schools and 6 maintained nursery schools. There's a plan to open 1 more additional nursery class in another school, and the teacher-supported provision for 0 to 4 in private voluntary sessions is high quality. We've had an ongoing debate and conversation about the local authority workplace nurseries. They remain as a part of our local authority offer. They're under review as a part of the work we're doing in general to review and improve our early years offer. Particularly those nurseries need to change to meet recent changes to Ofsted inspection requirements around safeguarding, disclosure and barring checks and minimum required qualifications. So Human Resources and the Council advise that a restructure is necessary to meet those legal requirements. Those nurseries also have a high unit cost, and we need to be clear about the value of the outcomes. So the nurseries remain. I've been lobbied continually ever since we published budget proposals that don't include the nurseries by people saying, are you going to close the nurseries? The budget proposals that we're currently consulting on do not include closing the nurseries. There is, however, a whole body of work that we need to do to make sure that our early years is the best possible standard.
Are there any questions or other comments? No. Well, it's a very welcome piece of work, and I'm very happy to agree the recommendations as set out in the report. Moving on then, we've dealt with item 5.7, so now 5.8, the asset strategy, which is to be presented by Councillor David Edgar.
Thank you. This strategy, I think, in essence, is about making sure that we've got the buildings that we need to deliver the services we provide, and also making sure that we don't have the buildings that we don't need. And additionally, that the buildings that we do use are in decent condition and have the lowest possible running costs. So the asset strategy is, I think, a substantial development on strategies or asset management plans that have gone before. It sets the context for the strategy in a number of ways. It talks about the budget and the financial implications of a smaller and smaller budget. It sets out the points in the community plan that are relevant. It talks about the way in which the strategic plan, the strategy plan, needs to be reflected in our asset work. And it also sets out an analysis of ways in which different service providers within the council, the different directorates, need to work and the things that they need by way of premises in order to do their work well. It gives a series of priorities. There are quite a number of priorities, but amongst those are community buildings work that the Mayor's agreed a framework for earlier this evening. It also sets as a priority delivering the new town hall, which has previously been agreed by the Cabinet, and it also identifies the need for us to make sure that we look at all the properties that we've got in order to work out those which are in poorest condition or cost us the most money, and for us to decide what we do with those. So I think this is a comprehensive, complete asset strategy which provides a very useful framework for the next 5 years of the council, and I recommend that the Mayor agrees with the recommendation on page 260.
Are there any other questions or any questions, comments? Our Executive Director is happy with the report, and as is the service head who produced the work. Yep. Anne Sutcliffe, who's done good work on it. So just to add to what David said, very, very briefly, one of the reasons we're considering this is because it's good practice. Another reason is because it's one of the issues that was highlighted in the appointment of the commissioners for our council. So it's getting us into a good place. And I'd emphasise one point, which is I think we're in the process of disposing of a couple of unused buildings, and in doing so we're going to save ourselves in excess of £100,000 a year in security costs for buildings and sites which we had no tangible use for. And that, I think, suggests that making decisions is sometimes a good idea, actually. And again, that's no criticism of anyone as yet unborn or living or whatever, but it's just about good management of our resources, because there's no such thing as free stuff, sadly. I wish there was. So I'm happy to agree the recommendation set out in the report. And at the previous meeting, we agreed to go ahead with the Civic Centre, and let's see where we get with that. Okay, so thanks very much for that. If I move on then to 5.9, corporate directors' discretions. I'm astonished we give our corporate directors any discretions, but we have a report with this title, and it tells us that they have exercised very few such discretions. In fact, as is traditional, it's only Aman Delvi who's exercised any discretion as a corporate director. And that, I'm just mocking him because this is about a piece of work that's been done in partnership with the LLDC. And are there any questions about this? I think it's essentially just for noting. Members happy? I'm happy then to agree the recommendation in the report. If we then move on to any other unrestricted business, there is none. We don't need to exclude the press and public. There are no exempt or confidential minutes. There's no exempt overview or scrutiny committee. I suppose we wouldn't know if it was exempt, would we? But there isn't one. And I don't need to take any items on key issues raised on confidential items because there aren't any. I think I then need to, I'm making heavy weather of this, I think I need to move on to the point where the meeting is closed. Is that right? Okay, so thanks very much for coming. Have a lovely evening. Thank you.